The house was quiet when I stepped inside, the air thick with the scent of vanilla candles and expensive perfume. Vanessa's perfume. I smiled to myself, heart pounding with excitement as I clutched the small envelope in my hands. My surprise weekend getaway tucked inside. She was going to love this. 3 days at a secluded beachside resort. No work, no distractions, just the two of us, alone in paradise. I moved through the house, expecting to hear the clinking of dishes from the kitchen or the sound of her soft humming. But instead, a different sound reached my ears. A deep, rumbling laugh. A man's laugh. From our bedroom. I stopped cold. My grip on the envelope tightened, my knuckles turning white. My mind raced, scrambling for an explanation, searching for any reason other than the one clawing its way into my brain. Maybe it was the TV. Maybe she was on the phone. Maybe, another laugh closer this time, low, amused, followed by the unmistakable rustling of sheets. I swallowed hard, every cell in my body screaming at me to turn around, to leave, to pretend I hadn't heard anything. But my feet moved forward on their own, slow and deliberate, my pulse hammering against my skull as I reached for the bedroom door. I pushed it open, and my world collapsed. Vanessa was sprawled across our bed, completely naked, her body tangled with someone else's. The man beside her stretched like a king in his throne, utterly unbothered by my presence. His muscled arms flexing as he rolled onto his side, lazily propping himself up on one elbow. Nathan Blake, my best man, my friend. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. My breath caught somewhere between my lungs and my throat, my body paralyzed in the doorway. This isn't real. This isn't real. But Vanessa made it real. She turned her head, looked straight at me and smiled. Not in guilt, not in fear, in satisfaction. "Oh, Ethan," she purred, voice dripping with mock surprise. She didn't bother covering herself, didn't move an inch to hide what she had done, what she was still doing. "You're home so soon." I staggered backward, my stomach twisting violently, while rising in my throat. I wanted to scream, to rage, to grab Nathan by his throat and tear him apart, but I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Nathan chuckled, running a hand lazily down Vanessa's body, his fingers tracing the curve of her hip. He was taunting me. He wanted me to watch. "She didn't tell you?" he mused, his voice slow, deliberate, laced with amusement. "We've been seeing each other for a while now." He grinned, watching me like a predator sizing up its prey. "You didn't notice?" I hadn't. Every late-night meeting, every business trip, every dismissive, "You're overthinking things, Ethan." It all clicked, the puzzle pieces snapping into place, forming a picture I never wanted to see. I clenched my fists, nails digging into my palms so hard I thought they'd break the skin. My body trembled with rage, my mind screaming, "Do something." But Vanessa just sighed, rolling onto her stomach, resting her chin on her hand as she studied me with amusement, as if I was nothing more than an inconvenience. "Ethan, sweetheart," she said, her tone light, condescending. "Don't look so hurt. It's not like this is a surprise." I felt something inside me snap. She tilted her head, waiting, watching, as if daring me to break, to fall apart, to give her exactly what she wanted. A weak, pathetic husband who couldn't even fight for his own wife. But I wouldn't give her that. Not yet. I forced myself to straighten, shoving every ounce of emotion deep, deep down, burying it beneath a layer of cold, hard steel. My hands steadied, my breathing evened out, my vision sharpened. Vanessa noticed. Her smirk faltered. For the first time that night, she looked uncertain. I stared at her, at Nathan, committing every single detail to memory. The way she looked at me with condescension, the way he laughed at my pain, the way they both thought I was already broken. They had no idea. They weren't just betraying me. They were creating a monster. I turned to leave. I had to. My chest was heaving, my pulse thundering in my ears, my body running hot with rage, disgust, and a sick, suffocating sense of helplessness. I could barely see through the red haze clouding my vision, barely process the fact that the woman I had loved, the woman I had given everything to, was lying naked in our bed with another man and smirking at me like I was some pathetic joke. My legs felt unsteady, my breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps, but I forced myself to move. I needed to get out. I needed space. I needed to think. Then Vanessa spoke, low and sweet, a whisper meant only for Nathan but loud enough for me to hear. "You're right. He's such a coward." That stopped me cold. My fingers curled into fists, my jaw locking so tight it ached, my entire body flooded with boiling fury. I turned back, lips parted, ready to unleash every ounce of rage clawing its way up my throat. But before I could say a word, I felt something. A sudden, crushing weight slamming into me from behind. I hit the ground hard. My skull bounced off the floor, stars bursting behind my eyelids, my ribs aching from the force of the impact. Nathan. His heavy frame pinned me down, his arms locking around my own, his breath hot against my ear. I thrashed, my body twisting, desperate to throw him off, but he was stronger, bigger, and he was enjoying this. "Calm down, buddy," he murmured, his voice dripping with amusement, as if this was all some game to him, like I was some weak, fragile thing struggling beneath him. My chest heaved, adrenaline surging, but before I could muster the strength to break free, Vanessa appeared above me, bare, glowing, a goddess of cruelty. Her smile was slow, deliberate, full of something I had never seen before, pure, unfiltered sadism. She crouched down, running her fingers through my hair, tilting her head as if she were studying a wounded animal. "You're always so predictable, Ethan," she murmured, her voice light, airy, as if she were reminiscing about some fond old memory, like I was nothing but a foolish pet who had disappointed her. I wanted to snap at her, to spit in her face, to tell her she was the predictable one, to tell her that I would never forget this moment, that I would make her regret every single second of it. But before I could open my mouth, I saw it. The gleam of metal in her hands. Handcuffs. My handcuffs. A slow, twisting dread coiled inside my stomach, but I refused to let it show. Not to her. Not to them. I gritted my teeth, muscles tensing as I tried once more to shove Nathan off me. But Vanessa was already moving. Click. The first cuff locked around my wrist. My struggles intensified, my mind screaming for me to fight, to thrash, to break free. But Vanessa was too quick, too precise. The second cuff snapped shut, and just like that I was bound to the foot of my own bed. A rush of nausea hit me. This wasn't happening. This wasn't real. I yanked at the cuffs, metal digging into my skin, a sickening clatter ringing through the room as they rattled against the bedpost. Panic flooded my veins. But Vanessa? She laughed. She laughed. She stood, stretching her arms over her head, completely at ease, completely unbothered, completely in control. Nathan released me, standing as well, watching me with a lazy smirk as I twisted and fought against the restraints, my breath ragged, my vision blurring with rage. Vanessa stepped back toward the bed, fingers trailing along the sheets, her gaze flicking between me and Nathan as if she were deciding what to do next. Then, with slow, deliberate cruelty, she climbed back onto the mattress, onto our bed, her body arching, her lips curling into a wicked, knowing smile. Then she turned to Nathan, and picked up exactly where they had left off, right in front of me. I screamed. I screamed until my throat burned, until my voice broke, until I thought my ribs would crack from the force of my fury. I pulled at the cuffs until my wrists bled. I thrashed so hard the bed shook beneath me, and they only laughed. Nathan turned his head, grinning as if this was the greatest thrill of his life. "She's something, isn't she?" he mused, voice thick with satisfaction. "You ever had her like this, Ethan?" Vanessa giggled, a sound that had once been sweet to me but now sounded like pure, unfiltered poison. "Oh, Nathan," she sighed, her voice breathy, teasing, delighted. "You know the answer to that." A knife through my chest, twisting. I stopped screaming. I stopped fighting. I just stared, silent, broken, seething. They thought they had won. They had no idea. No idea what they had just created. The room felt like it had shrunk, closing in around me, suffocating me with the heat of bodies, the lingering scent of sweat, sex, and something far worse, betrayal. Hours had passed, maybe longer. Time had lost all meaning. The struggle had drained out of me. My muscles weak, my wrists raw and bloody from the metal digging into my skin, the cuffs biting deeper every time I had thrashed. My head rested against the floor, my breath coming in slow, uneven drags, my entire body trembling. Not from exhaustion, not from fear, but from the fire simmering beneath my skin. It burned through me, a quiet, pulsing thing, growing stronger with each second that passed. Each whispered taunt, each cruel touch exchanged between them. I had stopped screaming, stopped begging. That was what they had wanted. That was what had made Vanessa finally turn her gaze back to me. She slid from the bed, her bare feet patting against the floor, each step deliberate, slow, taunting. I heard her kneel beside me before I saw her, felt the warmth of her body before her breath ghosted over my skin. I didn't flinch. I didn't move. I let her get close, let her believe I was defeated, let her think she had won. "Want to know a secret?" she whispered, her voice soft, conspiratorial. The way she used to murmur sweet nothings in my ear at night, back when I thought she was mine. She was close enough that I could feel the brush of her lips against my skin, a mockery of intimacy. I stared ahead, my fingers twitching slightly against the restraints, waiting, waiting, waiting. I never loved you. My world tilted. Something in my chest twisted, coiled tight, ready to snap. But I stayed still. I made myself listen. "All these years," she continued, her tone light, almost playful. "The devotion, the loyalty, it was all so pathetic." I exhaled slowly, the only sound in the room, but my vision blurred with red. "I thought maybe," she went on, sighing dramatically, like this was all so difficult for her. "Just maybe, you'd grow into a man who could satisfy me, but you didn't. So, I found someone who could." A shift in the bed. A chuckle. "Nathan. Still here. Still watching." I forced myself to move my eyes, just slightly, just enough to catch the smirk on his face. He was sitting up now, the sheets tangled around his waist, as if he had all the time in the world. He ran a lazy hand through his hair, flexed his arms, deliberately stretching. A display. A taunt. He turned his head toward me, grinning like a man who had already won. "And now," he murmured, his voice deep, smooth, "you get to watch what a real man looks like." The final crack. The last piece snapped. A silence settled over me, deep and suffocating. A moment of absolute clarity. Vanessa was still kneeling beside me, still waiting for me to break, to cry, to react. Nathan was still sprawled against the bed, smirking, so sure of himself. They thought I was weak. They thought I would crumble. They thought this was the end. They were wrong. The heat burning inside me hardened into something else. Something cold, something sharp, something far, far worse. I smiled. Not on the outside, not where they could see, but inside, where the real danger lay, where something dark and patient and hungry had begun to grow. They had no idea. They thought this night was theirs. They thought I would leave here broken. But I wasn't leaving here at all. Not yet, because what happens next? That will belong to me. I played my part well. For days, I let them believe they had broken me. I walked around like a ghost, eyes hollow, shoulders slumped. My voice a mere whisper of what it once was. When people asked how I was doing, I forced a tired smile, murmured something about moving on, about healing, about how it was for the best. I let them think I was defeated. I let them think I had accepted my fate. But inside, I was awake, more alive than I had ever been, because I had a purpose now. A singular, undeniable truth had settled into my bones, stronger than grief, louder than rage. Revenge was coming, and it would be so much worse than anything they had ever done to me. I started with the cameras. Not just the ones I had installed for security, but new ones, hidden ones. Tiny, untraceable, tucked into the corners of the bedroom they had defiled. in the house I had once called home. I watched them live their fantasy, revel in their destruction of me, laugh over drinks about my pathetic reaction. I listened as Vanessa told Nathan how she had never felt so free, how it was a relief to no longer pretend with me. She spoke of my pain like it was a joke. She called me weak. She told him that she was glad I had finally accepted reality. She had no idea I was watching. And I learned things, horrible things, secrets Vanessa had kept even from Nathan. Money stashed away in places he didn't know about. Conversations with men she hadn't told him about. Lies upon lies upon lies. And Nathan? He had his own sins, his own past, his own weaknesses. I uncovered them all, piece by piece, savoring each discovery like a predator learning every fragile spot on its prey. I knew what would break them, but knowing wasn't enough. I needed to be ready. That's when I went to her. Lillian Carter, my mother. The woman who had raised me with quiet hands and a gaze that had always been too knowing. She had seen the bruises on my soul before I ever spoke them. And when I finally did, when I told her everything, every last vile, humiliating detail, she simply nodded, exhaled slowly, and took my hands in hers. Her grip was firm, her fingers calloused in ways I had never questioned before. "You want them to suffer," she said, and it wasn't a question. I nodded. "You want them to fear you, to wake up every night gasping, heart pounding, knowing you're out there, waiting." Another nod. A slow, eerie smile curled on her lips, and in that moment, I realized something I had never understood before. My mother had seen darkness too, and she had survived it. "Good," she whispered, standing, motioning for me to follow. "Come, there are things you need to learn." She led me downstairs. I had been in my mother's basement before. It had always been just another part of the house. A cluttered storage space filled with forgotten boxes and old furniture. But as we walked, something shifted. The air grew heavier, thicker. And when she flicked on the light, the room before me was not the basement I remembered. The walls were lined with tools, some old, some new, some I didn't recognize. Metal gleamed under the dim glow of the bulb, neatly arranged, not a speck of dust on them. There was a chair in the center, leather straps, a drain in the floor. My mother stood beside me, watching my face, waiting for me to understand. A slow realization crawled over my skin. "Lillian," I said carefully, my voice barely above a whisper. "What is this?" She tilted her head. "It's where I learned," she murmured. "Where I made sure no one would ever hurt me again." I turned to her, searching her face, but she only smiled. And then she taught me. She taught me how to break a man's body without leaving a single trace. How to inflict pain that didn't bruise, only burned, deep and unforgiving. How to push a mind past the edge to keep someone alive longer than they should be, just so they could suffer more. "Don't destroy them quickly," she murmured, guiding my hand over the tools, the metal cold, but comforting. "Make them beg for the end." I met her gaze, and I understood. Vanessa and Nathan thought they had won. They thought I had given up. They had no idea, because soon they wouldn't just regret what they had done to me. They would regret ever being born. I kept the invitation simple, knowing Vanessa would never accept if she suspected anything. A message just casual enough to seem believable, just pitiful enough to stroke her ego. Dinner? Just one last time. I need closure. I knew how to bait her. I knew she would revel in the idea of seeing me still broken, still groveling, still desperately clinging to the scraps of her affection like a lost little puppy. I could almost hear her laugh when she read it, feel her smirk as she turned to Nathan and whispered something cruel about how I just couldn't let go. She responded within minutes. "Fine, but don't make it awkward." I stared at those words, at the arrogance dripping from them, at the way she still believed she had one. My fingers tightened around the phone, my jaw locking so tight I thought my teeth might shatter. But then I let the anger go, let it dissolve into something colder, sharper, more patient. Because it didn't matter what she believed. It only mattered what was about to happen. The restaurant was perfect. Secluded, quiet, the kind of place where no one paid attention. She arrived in a red dress, something elegant but just revealing enough to remind me of what she thought I had lost. Her heels clicked against the polished floor as she approached, her confidence radiating through the air like a sickness. She slid into the seat across from me, crossing her legs slowly, deliberately, letting the fabric shift up her thigh just enough for me to notice. She wanted me to notice. "Didn't think you'd have the guts to reach out," she mused, lifting the menu as if she were already bored. I smiled, just a little, just enough to keep her comfortable. I guess I needed some closure. Her lips curled, so amused, so sure of herself. "That's sweet, Ethan. Really. But you know you'll be okay, right? In time. You're just not built for a woman like me. Not built for her." The waiter appeared. I had already ordered the wine, already chosen the dishes. Vanessa, predictably, raised an eyebrow but said nothing, too entertained by the idea that I was still trying. I poured her a glass myself, watching as the dark red liquid filled the delicate crystal, the scent rich and sweet. She lifted it to her lips without hesitation, her fingers curling around the stem, her throat moving as she swallowed. She never even noticed. The compound worked fast. She was fine for the first few bites, her conversation light, taunting, throwing jabs at my pathetic need for closure, my inability to move on, my failure as a man. But then I saw it, the first flicker of something different. Her fingers twitched slightly. Her breathing hitched. She shook her head once, as if trying to clear a fog that had settled over her thoughts. But the moment her eyes met mine, I knew she understood. Something was wrong. She placed her wine glass down carefully, her movements slower now, heavier. Her throat tightened. "Ethan?" she murmured. But there was something off in her voice. A slur. A hesitation. She blinked, her pupils widening, her body swaying slightly, her breath coming in short, uneven bursts. What did you?" I leaned forward, watching, waiting, thrilling in every second of her unraveling. "You should relax," I said, keeping my voice soft, steady. "It's just something to help you slow down a little. You're not dying, Vanessa." I smiled. "Not yet." Her eyes widened. Fear. It was the first time I had ever seen it in her. She tried to push back from the table, but her body betrayed her. Her limbs wouldn't cooperate, her fingers barely able to grasp the edge of the chair. Her breathing grew shallow, panicked, her lips parting in a silent attempt to scream, but she couldn't. She couldn't move, and I had never seen anything so beautiful. I stood, moving to her side, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek as her skin turned cold. Her eyes followed me, the only thing she still had control over, darting back and forth, pupils blown wide with realization. "I told you I needed closure," I whispered, leaning in close enough to feel the tremor in her body, the horror sinking into her bones. And then, with a slow, careful ease, I pressed my lips to her ear and said the words I had waited so long to say. "The real fun is just beginning." The first thing she felt was cold. A deep, bone-chilling cold that wrapped around her skin, biting into her flesh like 1,000 needles. Her body ached, muscles stiff, joints locked, the feeling of rough, unyielding rope biting into her wrists and ankles, keeping her trapped. She tried to move, but her limbs wouldn't obey, her breath quickening as the realization sank in. She was naked, bound, helpless. And then, she opened her eyes. The dim, flickering light barely illuminated the space, casting jagged shadows along the concrete walls, each one distorted, twisting, like they were reaching for her. But it wasn't the shadows that made her breath catch, that made her stomach lurch with raw, unfiltered terror. It was the photos. They covered the walls, hundreds of them, pinned up with surgical precision. Pictures of her and Nathan, frozen moments in time, stolen from their nights together, from the bed she had once shared with the man who now stood somewhere in this room, watching her. And then, she heard it, a sound so awful, so unnatural, it sent ice through her veins. A wet, gurgling noise, a muffled scream, a whimper. Her head snapped toward the center of the room, her heart hammering against her ribs, her throat clenching as she saw him. Nathan, strapped to a chair, his head slumped forward, his body trembling, convulsing, his breath coming in short, agonized gasps. The straps dug into his arms, his chest, his legs, locking him in place. The leather darkened with blood. So much blood. It pooled at his feet, dripped down his bare chest, seeped into the floor beneath him. His hands, his fingers, they were gone. Jagged, raw stumps remained, twitching uselessly as his body shuddered. His mouth hung open, but something was wrong. Vanessa's gaze lowered. Her stomach twisted. His tongue. A mutilated, unrecognizable slab of meat lay discarded on the floor, glistening under the weak light, its edges frayed, shredded. Nathan let out another choked, garbled sound, a desperate attempt to scream, but it came out as nothing more than a broken, wet exhale. He was drowning in his own blood, and then he stepped forward. The sound of boots against the concrete. Slow, unhurried, a figure emerged from the shadows, stepping into the light, his movements deliberate, precise, his presence looming, suffocating. Ethan. His sleeves were rolled up to his elbows, his forearms splattered in red, the lines of his muscles tight with restrained violence. In his right hand, he held something small, delicate, gleaming under the sickly light. A scalpel. Vanessa's stomach clenched, her pulse roaring in her ears, her breath coming in rapid, panicked gasps through the gag that was stuffed into her mouth. Her mind screamed at her to wake up, to run, to escape, but there was no waking up. This was real. Ethan moved toward Nathan first, tilting his head slightly, studying his handiwork, watching the way Nathan's body twitched, the way his blood dripped onto the floor in uneven splatters. Then, finally, he spoke. "I'm not a real man, right?" His voice was cold, dead. Not angry, not heated, just ice. Nathan gave a shuddering whimper, his ruined mouth trembling, his body thrashing weakly against the restraints. But Ethan only tilted his head the other way, watching with mild interest, as if observing an insect pinned to a board. "Not strong enough. Not good enough. Not a man," Ethan murmured, running his fingers along the edge of the scalpel, his expression unreadable. "That's what you said, wasn't it?" Nathan let out another garbled sound, his head jerking, his eyes pleading, dripping with terror. Ethan smiled, and then he turned to Vanessa. Her heart stopped, his gaze locked onto hers, piercing, relentless, consuming. Slowly, he crouched in front of her, resting his elbows on his knees, the scalpel still gleaming in his grip. He reached forward, trailing a single blood-stained finger along her jawline, and she let out a muffled sob, her entire body trembling, convulsing. "You enjoyed watching me suffer," he murmured, his voice almost gentle, almost affectionate. "You laughed while I begged." Her breath hitched, tears burned in her eyes, his smile widened. "You thought you'd won." His fingers drifted lower, trailing down her collarbone, her chest, his touch featherlight, teasing, as if savoring the anticipation. Then he brought the scalpel to her lips. "You're going to feel everything, Vanessa?" he whispered, leaning in, so close she could feel his breath. "And when I'm done." He pressed the blade just beneath her chin, tilting her head up, forcing her to meet his eyes. "You'll beg me for the end." She tried to scream, but it was nothing more than a strangled sob against the gag. The panic in her eyes, wide and glossy with terror, was intoxicating. Her body trembled beneath the restraints, jerking violently as she begged without words, her chest heaving, her fingers twitching, nails digging into her own palms in sheer desperation. But I didn't care. I wouldn't listen. She had her chance to plead when she stripped me of my dignity, when she chained me down, when she looked me in the eye and laughed while my world shattered. But now her pleas were nothing more than music, a desperate, broken melody that meant nothing to me. Killing her would have been easy, simple, but that wasn't what I wanted. That wasn't what she deserved. Death would have been an escape, an end to her suffering, a release from the horror that was coming. But I wanted her to wake up every day and wish she had died. She had always been vain, always admired herself in mirrors, in windows, in every reflective surface she could find, running her hands over her body as if it was a gift to the world. She had used it as a weapon, a tool, a way to control, manipulate, destroy. She thought it made her powerful. She thought she was untouchable. So I took it from her. She thrashed when I grabbed her jaw, forcing her head still, her breath coming in sharp, muffled sobs. Her eyes were screaming, her pupils blown wide, her mind breaking before I had even begun. The scalpel felt weightless in my hand, sharp and delicate, so small for something so powerful. I let the tip graze against her lips, the slightest pressure drawing the tiniest bead of blood. A warning. Promise. You said you never loved me? I whispered, tilting my head as I studied her. My voice steady, calm, like I was discussing the weather. You said my devotion was pathetic, that I wasn't a real man. I let the blade drift lower, just under her jawline. Her breath hitched, her entire body locked up. So tell me, Vanessa. My fingers curled tighter around the handle, digging into the flesh beneath her chin, forcing her head up, making her look at me. Do I seem weak now? She sobbed against the gag. And then I began. I cut away the power she thought she had. She had used her lips to seduce, to lie, to mock. So I made sure she would never speak another deception again. The blade worked slowly, carefully, making sure every slice was deep enough to wound but not enough to kill. She thrashed, but the straps held her down, her body convulsing against the pain, her shrieks muffled but deliciously raw. Blood trickled down her chin, her chest, staining her body in the same way she had once stained my soul. But I wasn't finished. Her hands, the same hands that had caressed Nathan while I was shackled at the foot of the bed, the same hands that had brushed my hair so sweetly while she whispered her fake love into my ear. I took those, too, one by one. By the time it was over, she wasn't Vanessa anymore. She was something else, something ruined, something that would never again use her beauty, her body, her voice, to destroy another man. She passed out long before I was done. I made sure she wouldn't die, made sure she would live to see herself, to know what she had become. And when the time came, I let the hospital find her. When she woke up, she screamed. The sound was hollow, guttural, more of a choking sob than a scream, but it carried through the walls, through the halls, through the very foundation of her new life. She clawed at the bandages, her body convulsing as she realized what had been taken, what had been destroyed. She had nothing. Nathan was gone. No body, no remains, no trace. I was gone too. No records, no clues, no evidence of where I had disappeared to. But that was the worst part for her, wasn't it? The not knowing, the uncertainty. Because every night, as she lay in her bed, alone, broken, shattered beyond repair, she would wonder, was I coming back? Was I watching her? Was tonight the night I would finish what I started? The fear would never leave her, and that was my final revenge. She would suffer, forever, and that's the end of today's story. If you enjoyed this journey, please give this video a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories like this one. Got thoughts or experiences you'd like to share? Drop them in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.